My name is Alex. It all started with a simple search for a unique Halloween decoration. I stumbled upon a website called the Dark Web Delivery. The site promised one-of-a-kind, handcrafted items that would send shivers down your spine. As a horror enthusiast, I couldn't resist. Little did I know, my innocent curiosity would lead me into a nightmare I would never forget. The website was a maze of eerie images and cryptic descriptions. Each product seemed more unsettling than the last. My eyes fell on an antique-looking music box. Its description read, "Melody of Madness, a tune that haunts the soul." It was perfect for my collection. Without hesitation, I added it to my cart and proceeded to checkout. The confirmation email was immediate but strange. Instead of a typical order number, it simply said, "Your order is being processed. Await the arrival." Days passed and the anticipation grew. I told myself it was just an elaborate marketing ploy to build suspense. One evening, as I was preparing for bed, my doorbell rang. It was well past midnight. A chill ran down my spine as I approached the door. Peering through the peephole, I saw no one. But there on the doorstep was a plain brown package. It had no labels, no markings, nothing to indicate its origin. I brought the package inside and set it on the kitchen table. My curiosity and excitement outweighed my fear. With trembling hands, I opened the box. Inside, wrapped in old, yellowed newspaper, was the music box. It was even more exquisite in person, adorned with intricate carvings of twisted faces and dark, hollow eyes. I turned the small key on its side, and the music began to play. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, a series of soft, tinkling notes that seemed to echo through the room. But as the tune continued, it became more dissonant, more disturbing. The air grew colder, and shadows seemed to creep along the walls. Suddenly, the music stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. Then I heard it, a faint whispering, like voices just out of reach. They grew louder, more insistent, until they filled my head. I tried to cover my ears, but it was no use. The whispers were inside my mind. Panicked, I grabbed the music box and threw it back into the package. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more frantic. I could feel something watching me, something unseen but undeniably present. Desperate, I ran to my bedroom, locking the door behind me. Sleep was impossible. The whispers continued, accompanied by a sense of impending doom. I knew I had to get rid of the music box. At dawn, I grabbed the package and drove to the nearest river. Without a second thought, I hurled it into the water, watching it sink into the depths. For a moment, the world seemed to return to normal. The whispers ceased and the oppressive atmosphere lifted. I sighed in relief, thinking it was over. But as I drove back home, a new email notification appeared on my phone. It was from the Dark Web Delivery. The subject line read, "Your return has been received. Expect a replacement soon." I never should have opened that website. Now I am trapped in a cycle of horror that I cannot escape. Each new delivery is worse than the last, and the whispers, they never truly go away. My name is Alex, and I am living a nightmare brought to life by my own curiosity.
My name is Sarah, and this is the story of my sister, Emily, and the horror that befell our family one cold autumn night. It started innocently enough. Emily, just 6 years old, had always been a lively, cheerful child. But one evening, she returned from playing in the woods behind our house, her eyes wide and her face pale. "Sarah, I met a new friend," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "His name is Jacob. He wants to play with me." I didn't think much of it at the time. Imaginary friends were common for kids her age. But soon, strange things began to happen. Emily would sit alone in her room, having conversations with someone unseen. She started waking up with scratches on her arms, claiming Jacob had done it. One night, I awoke to a blood-curdling scream. I rushed to Emily's room to find her standing in the center, her eyes wide with terror. She was staring at something I couldn't see. "Emily, what's wrong?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Jacob is here," she whispered, her voice hollow. "He's inside me now." Suddenly, her body convulsed, and her eyes rolled back into her head. I watched in horror as she seemed to struggle against some invisible force. Her small frame twisted unnaturally, and she began to speak in a deep, guttural voice that was not her own. "Sarah," the voice growled, "she belongs to me now." I backed away, fear gripping my heart. "Leave her alone," I screamed. "You're not welcome here." Emily's body collapsed to the floor, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then she looked up at me, her eyes filled with a darkness I had never seen before. "Sarah," she said, her voice now a mixture of her own and the sinister one, "you can't save her. Jacob is too strong." Desperate, I called for my parents. They rushed in, and together we tried to calm Emily, but the malevolent presence inside her only grew stronger. We sought help from doctors, priests, and anyone who would listen, but nothing seemed to work. The once bright and joyful Emily was now a shell of her former self, haunted by the spirit of Jacob. Our house became a place of fear and despair, filled with the echoes of Emily's cries and Jacob's sinister laughter. One night, as I sat by her bed, holding her hand, I made a promise. "Emily, I will find a way to free you," I whispered. She looked at me, a flicker of her old self shining through the darkness. "Please, Sarah," she begged, "don't let him win." I nodded, determined to save my sister from the horror that had taken hold of her. I knew the road ahead would be long and fraught with danger, but I couldn't give up. Emily was my sister, and I would do whatever it took to bring her back from the clutches of the ghost that possessed her. And so, our battle against Jacob began, a fight for Emily's soul that would test the limits of our family's love and strength. But no matter how dark the nights became, I held on to the hope that one day, we would free Emily from the haunting that had torn our lives apart.
My name is Alex Mercer, and I never believed in ghosts. That is, until I stayed at the Eldridge Hotel. It all started on a cold November evening. I was on a road trip through the Midwest and decided to take a detour to the small, forgotten town of Eldridge. There wasn't much to see there, just a few rundown buildings and a diner that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 50s. But the Eldridge Hotel stood out. It was an old Victorian building, towering above the other structures with an eerie elegance. I checked in late, just as the sun was setting. The receptionist, an older woman with a stern face, handed me the key to room 214. Her hand lingered for a moment, and she looked at me with what I can only describe as pity. "Enjoy your stay?" she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I shrugged it off and made my way to the room. The hotel was a maze of narrow hallways and creaky wooden floors. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and something else, something metallic like blood. Room 214 was at the end of a dimly lit corridor. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dusty room. The wallpaper was peeling, and the furniture looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. I dropped my bag on the bed and sighed. It was only for one night, I told myself. As the night wore on, I found it hard to sleep. The room was cold, and the silence was unsettling. I could hear every creak and groan of the old building. Around midnight, I decided to get up and explore the hotel. Maybe I could find a vending machine or something to drink. The hallways were even darker now, and the shadows seemed to move as I walked past. I made my way to the lobby, but it was empty. The receptionist was nowhere to be seen. I wandered through the hotel, my footsteps echoing in the silence. That's when I heard it, a faint, rhythmic tapping coming from above. I looked up and saw a staircase leading to the attic. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. The staircase was narrow and steep, and each step creaked loudly under my weight. When I reached the attic, the tapping stopped. I shone my flashlight around the room, revealing old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. In the corner, I saw an old trunk. I approached the trunk, my heart pounding in my chest. As I reached out to open it, the temperature in the room dropped suddenly. My breath formed white clouds in the air. I hesitated, but then I heard the tapping again, this time louder and closer. I opened the trunk. Inside, I found a collection of old photographs and letters. The photos were of the hotel, but in its heyday, filled with guests dressed in early 20th century attire. One photograph caught my eye, a woman in a white dress, standing in front of room 214. Her eyes seemed to follow me. I picked up one of the letters and began to read. It was dated 1923 and was addressed to a woman named Eliza. It spoke of a tragic love affair, a jealous husband, and a murder. The last line sent chills down my spine. They say her spirit still haunts room 214, waiting for her lover to return. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I turned around, but there was no one there. The tapping resumed, now right behind me. I spun around, shining my flashlight wildly, but saw nothing. Panic set in, and I bolted down the stairs, nearly tripping in my haste. I reached my room and slammed the door shut, my heart racing. I could still hear the tapping, now coming from inside the walls. The room grew colder, and I saw my breath again. The photograph of the woman in the white dress was now on my bed, though I hadn't brought it with me. I didn't sleep that night. The tapping continued, growing louder and more insistent. As dawn approached, it finally stopped. I packed my things and left the hotel as quickly as I could. The receptionist was gone, and the lobby was empty. As I drove away from Eldridge, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a figure in a white dress standing in the road, staring after me. I never went back to the Eldridge Hotel, and I never spoke of that night again. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I can still hear the tapping, and I know that Eliza is still waiting, trapped in room 214, forever haunted by a love that never returned.
My name is Dr. Henry Caldwell, and I've always considered myself a rational man of science. But what I encountered one fateful evening shattered my understanding of reality. It started with a dig in a remote part of the world, deep in the heart of a dense, uncharted forest. My team and I were on the hunt for artifacts that could shed light on early human history. We found more than we bargained for. We unearthed what appeared to be a perfectly preserved caveman, encased in a layer of ice. His features were strikingly lifelike, and as we carefully transported him back to the lab, a strange feeling settled over me, as if we were disturbing something ancient and powerful. Back at the lab, we began the thawing process. That's when things took a turn for the inexplicable. As the ice melted, the caveman's eyes snapped open, and he took a shuddering breath. We were stunned. How could he be alive after all this time? The chaos that ensued was like a nightmare. The caveman, disoriented and terrified, broke free from the lab. He was impossibly strong, tossing aside anyone who tried to stop him. Before we knew it, he had escaped into the city. I was the only one who managed to follow him. Armed with only a flashlight and my wits, I ventured into the dark streets. The city at night was a maze of shadows and strange noises, and the thought of an ancient human navigating it was unsettling, to say the least. I caught sight of him near an alley, huddled and frightened. I approached slowly, trying to appear non-threatening. "It's okay," I said softly. "I'm not here to hurt you." His eyes were wild, darting around as if he were seeing ghosts. And maybe he was. In his mind, this place must have been an alien world, filled with incomprehensible sights and sounds. He began to calm down, and for a moment, I thought I could reach him. But then the city itself seemed to rebel against us. The streetlights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. The air grew thick and oppressive, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread. It was as if the city was rejecting him, an ancient being out of time and place. In the darkness, I heard his breathing quicken. A low, guttural growl escaped his throat. I shone my flashlight towards him, and what I saw made my blood run cold. His eyes glowed with a primal, otherworldly light. He wasn't just a man out of time, there was something else, something ancient and malevolent, lurking within him. He lunged at me with inhuman speed. I barely had time to react, stumbling backward as his hand grazed my arm. Pain shot through me, and I realized he had claws-sharp, animalistic claws. I ran, not daring to look back. I stumbled into a nearby building, slamming the door behind me. My heart pounded in my chest as I heard his footsteps approaching. The door shook under his blows, but somehow, it held. I backed away, went deeper into the building, hoping to find another way out. Then, everything went silent. The door stopped shaking, and the oppressive air seemed to lift. I cautiously approached the door and listened. Nothing. I dared to open it a crack and peered outside. The caveman was gone. I stepped out into the alley, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The city was quiet, almost eerily so. It was as if the presence of the ancient being had been erased, leaving no trace behind. I returned to the lab, my mind racing. The team was in disarray, trying to make sense of what had happened. But there were no answers, only more questions. The caveman had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the shattered remains of our understanding. I've since dedicated my life to finding him, to understanding what we unleashed that night. But part of me fears that some things are better left buried, forgotten in the annals of time. Because I know that somewhere out there, the caveman walks among us, a relic of a past that should never have been awakened. And every night, as I lay in bed, I hear the faint, echoing growl of a creature that does not belong in our world, a reminder that the past is never truly dead, it merely waits for the right moment to return.
My name is Jake Thompson, and I deliver pizzas for a living. It's not the most exciting job, but it's straightforward except for one stormy night that changed everything. Near the end of my shift, I got an order from a remote address on the outskirts of town. My boss handed me the pizza box with a smirk. Good luck with this one. Jake, the address is a bit unusual. I punched the address into my GPS and set off. The rain made the drive slow and treacherous. The city lights faded into the distance, and I found myself driving through winding, narrow roads flanked by dense woods. The house appeared out of nowhere, an old, decrepit mansion with flickering porch lights and overgrown weeds. I parked and grabbed the pizza, hesitating before stepping out. The air was thick with the scent of rain and something metallic. I approached the door and rang the bell. The sound echoed inside, but there was no response. I knocked louder this time. Just as I was about to turn back, the door creaked open. A woman stood there, her face pale and gaunt, eyes hollow. She wore an old-fashioned dress that looked out of place. She stared at me for a moment before speaking in a soft, almost whispery voice. "You've brought the pizza?" I nodded, holding out the box. She took it, her bony fingers brushing against mine, sending a chill down my spine. She handed me a crumpled bill. It felt cold and damp, like it had been submerged in water. "Thanks," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "Have a good night." She didn't respond, just closed the door. As I walked back to my car, I saw a shadowy figure in an upstairs window watching me. My heart raced, but I shrugged it off and hurried back to my car. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The rain intensified, making it hard to see the road. Suddenly, my headlights flickered and the engine sputtered. The car came to a stop in the middle of the deserted road. "Great," I muttered, trying to restart the engine. No luck. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. I was stranded. I got out of the car, hoping to find a house nearby where I could call for assistance. The road was empty, flanked by the dark, foreboding woods. As I walked, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, but there was no one there. Just the rain and the wind rustling through the trees. Then I saw it, the same mansion, now looming in front of me again, as if I had never left. My heart pounded in my chest. How was this possible? I had driven miles away from here, but there it was, the flickering porch light casting eerie shadows. I approached cautiously, every instinct telling me to run. But I needed help, and this was the only place around. I rang the bell again, and the door opened instantly. The same woman stood there, but this time she smiled. It was a chilling, unnatural smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You've returned," she said, her voice echoing in the empty hallway behind her. My car broke down. "Can I use your phone?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Of course," she said, stepping aside to let me in. I hesitated but stepped inside. The house smelled of damp and decay. The wallpaper was peeling and the furniture was covered in dust. She led me to a dimly lit room with an old rotary phone on a small table. "Thank you," I said, picking up the receiver. There was no dial tone, just static. I hung up and tried again, same result. "It doesn't work," I said, turning to face her, but she was gone. The door to the room was closed, and I was alone. Panic set in. I rushed to the door and tried to open it, but it was locked. I banged on it, shouting for help, but there was no response. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the room into darkness. I fumbled for my flashlight and turned it on. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing something that made my blood run cold. In the corner of the room, a figure stood motionless. It was the same shadowy figure I had seen in the window. As I approached, the figure moved, stepping into the light. It was a man, or what used to be a man. His skin was pale and decomposed, his eyes hollow sockets. He reached out towards me, and I stumbled back, tripping over the phone cord and falling to the ground. I didn't look back. I ran through the dark, twisted corridors, the walls closing in on me. I found the front door and yanked it open, sprinting into the rain-soaked night. My car was still there, and I didn't stop running until I was inside, slamming the door behind me. The engine roared to life on the first try, and I sped away, not daring to look back. I didn't stop driving until I reached the city, the bright lights and bustling streets a stark contrast to the nightmare I had just escaped.